learn how to make friends, even though it was painful. Now what we're seeing is a generation of people who can use technology to run away from their problems. So I would say that what I really see is whatever direction you're moving in life, technology will amplify that. So if you're moving in the wrong direction, it'll make it worse. But if you look at people like yourself and maybe me, we use technology to amplify the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's still, even with all of the...
Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, the TV Reality Show. Yesterday, I will be checking on how to control your emotion, become mentally strong. Dr. K, Health Gamer. Let's go to the video.
You spend a lot of time thinking about our interaction with screens.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe what technology is doing to our brains?
I think the short answer is not good. So I think technology has a lot of benefits. So it has a lot of benefits for our lives. But specifically, what is it doing to our brains, I think is, generally speaking, not very good. So just as one example, if you look at basically social media, video games, pornography, most of the technology that we use that is not directly work-related is going to have suppressive effects on our negative emotional circuitry. So anytime you're feeling bad, if you browse social media or you play a video game, it's going to shut off your negative emotions, which can feel good in the short term, but in the long term, it's really not good.
Right. So it is a anesthetic
that
people use to salve bad emotion. I have seen a number of girl friends who, if they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, will get on their phone and self-soothe by scrolling.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone does that. So,
yes.
So I think if you really pay attention, what I've noticed is, watch yourself in a transition. So anytime there's a transition, anytime you're getting into the elevator, you're waiting in line somewhere, you're even getting up from your work desk to walk somewhere else, people will just automatically pull out their phones. So we've become so hooked to these things, and I think app designers, phone designers have also tried to capitalize on that impulsivity. So if you think about it, even things like Face ID, that shrinks the time between an impulse up here and engagement in your phone.
What does chronic, long-term hiding from feeling feelings result in?
I think I'd say the biggest problem that it creates is being stagnant in life. So if we understand, let's think about this, right? So everyone thinks we have good emotions and bad emotions. So we have these emotions that are good, like excitement, joy, curiosity, love. And then we have bad emotions like anger, sadness, shame, fear. And we don't want the bad emotions, we want the good emotions. But if you stop and think about it for a second, every human being on the planet has evolved to experience bad emotions. It's a feature, it's not a bug. And then the question is why? And if we look at our negative emotional circuitry, it is very close, like anatomically. Our limbic system is very close to our hippocampus, which is where learning and memory take place. So they're sitting right next to each other, a lot of strong connections. So negative emotions are powerful sources of information and motivation. So if you kind of think about anxiety, we all want to conquer anxiety. But if we stop and really think about it, anxiety helps us realize what to avoid. It drives us in a particular direction. If we look at emotions like shame actually is supposed to be a powerful motivator to drive corrective action. So if I feel ashamed for failing a test, I want to study really hard so I never feel that shame again. And so paradoxically, what happens when we shut off our negative emotions is we lose the motivation to actually fix our problems. And this is why I think we see a generation of people who are stuck.
Jonathan Haidt was on the show recently talking about his new book, The Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
How much of the modern uptick in anxiety, depression, persistent feelings of listlessness and hopelessness, how much of that do you think actually should be laid at the feet of social media?
I think a fair amount. I don't know how to give it a percentage, maybe somewhere between 30 and 50%. But I think that what I really see with technology is that it propagates problems. So technology in some ways, so there's actually, I mean, it creates some problems, but it also propagates problems. So in my kind of clinical work, what I see a lot of is that, if you're depressed about something in life, social media or video games will propagate that problem way worse. So what I see a lot of is like, let's say I'm a 15-year-old kid, I'm overweight, I'm going through puberty, my voice is cracking, I don't feel great about myself, I don't have a whole lot of friends. And when I was growing up, like, I had no choice but to overcome that in some way because I had no escape. So I had to learn how to make friends, even though it was painful. Now what we're seeing is a generation of people who can use technology to run away from their problems. So I would say that what I really see is whatever direction you're moving in life, technology will amplify that. So if you're moving in the wrong direction, it'll make it worse. But if you look at people like yourself and maybe me, we use technology to amplify the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's still, even with all of the millions of plays and all the rest of the stuff, technology is pretty close to like a net zero for me overall. I have a very negative relationship, I think, with my phone and with social media. A lot of shame around being so fragile and fickle that I can't control the compulsion to take it out, to check it. You see from a front row seat all of the minutes and hours that you fritter away, all of the times that you open up another tab, and then you try and then bring in additional technology to try and constrain this. I've been using Opal for iPhone, I'm using Cold Turkey for Mac, which sort of limit websites within particular schedules throughout the day. And I don't feel proud of my phone and technology and social media use, even though it's something that has created a life that I very much enjoy. I think a lot of people feel like that.
Yeah, so I have kind of a weird answer to that, which is like, so what came first, the shame or the problem with technology?
Probably the shame.
Yeah, right. So I think this is what we tend to see is that, so if you have, and this is kind of the Sanskrit concept of something called a samskar, which is like a ball of undigested negative emotion. And even in psychoanalysis, we kind of have this theory that's like Freud and Jung kind of came up with, right? That we have stuff living in our subconscious. And then what happens is that feeling of shame will find some manifestation in your life. And unless you heal that feeling of shame, so why is it that you feel shame in relation to technology instead of anger? Instead of paranoia that, oh my God, because I'm so addicted to technology, everything's going to fall apart, it'll all get messed up, or you're pissed at yourself, or you're pissed at iPhone makers, or whatever. So the manifestation, your manifestation of how you relate to technology comes in part from you. And so I think when I work with people, usually what I find is the antidote to that is get to the root of that shame and where that shame is kind of lingering from, coming from. And you know, I can even see in your life that you've become so amazing. And I would bet money that your search for being an amazing human being, physically fit, successful, proud, emotionally connected with yourself, has been to run away from a version of Chris that was ashamed of himself.
Oh, absolutely correct. Yeah. And the emotional connection thing, I'm glad that you're here. This is something I'm pretty obsessed by at the moment, trying to feel feelings and work out how emotions work. Before we go into that, let's say there is someone listening that's like, I think I feel shame. I think that does arise in me. Perhaps that's something that's there. Dr. K just spoke about you get to the root of it and kind of look at it and stuff. What does that mean? Like, how do people deal with shame through self-inquiry, or how do people deal with shame at all?
So, I mean, I have a couple of different answers. So one is like based on this yogic tradition. So I spent years studying to become a monk, and I think that's incredibly invaluable. And then also from like a psychiatric perspective of being a psychiatrist and doing psychotherapy, I think both directions kind of meet, by the way. So I'd say we have to start by understanding that, okay, so let's think about emotions, right? So if I am walking down the street and let's say I reach out to pet a dog, and if I pet a dog and the dog like nips at me, I feel fear. And then if I'm a kid, I may start crying, and then mommy or daddy picks me up. And then 5 minutes later, I feel totally fine because mommy or daddy has distracted me, gives me ice cream, whatever. But then if you sort of look at it, the next time I see a dog, I will have a physiologic response. I will feel afraid of the dog, even if the dog is across the street. So in a very, very simple sense, if we look at the way that we learn, in the way that the trauma works. So we have a negative experience, and oftentimes we do not process that experience. It simply goes dormant. And so the next time that I see the dog, the fear comes rushing back because it's living in my mind.
What does processing an experience mean?
Yeah, so let's say that you were walking down the street as a grown adult. Do you like dogs?
Yes.
And if you try to pet a dog and it nips at you, in the first second or less than a second, you will have the identical physiologic response as a 5-year-old. Your sympathetic nervous system will activate. You'll panic. You'll get a burst of adrenaline. And then what would you say to yourself after the dog tries to bite you?
That dog's a dick. What caused that to happen? Was there something that I did? Is it because of the...
There you go, right? So what happens in a 5-year-old's mind? Not that. Did I do something to cause this? What's going on with the dog? Maybe I should be a little bit more careful. So what you literally do is you take that emotion and then you look at it from different perspectives. This is also what we do in psychotherapy. When someone has let's say they have a bunch of shame, we'll ask the question, okay, where does that shame come from? How do you feel about that? What are the different ways that you can look at it? And if you sort of look at it, the other thing that happens with shame is we start to develop identities of ourselves. So there's the emotion of shame, and then we start to form conclusions about ourselves. Like, I feel ashamed in this moment, and then that becomes, I am a terrible human being. I'm a loser, right? Now this becomes a statement of fact that has a life that is independent of the shameful experience. So when we talk about processing shame, there is some amount of emotional work, but then there's also work on the ego level, or the ahamkara is what it's called in Sanskrit, where our emotional experiences result in conclusions that we form about ourselves. And so those conclusions need to be re-examined. And the most damning thing is that when we are emotional, we form very powerful conclusions, but since we're emotional, they're more likely to be wrong. And if anyone has gone through a breakup, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you go through all these conclusions in your head. This person is terrible. Women are terrible. I'm terrible. I'll never find love again. You form all these conclusions from an emotional state. But those conclusions don't go away when literally the emotional circuitry of our brain reaches homeostasis or equilibrium. Those learnings stay with us.
So we have the ball of unprocessed emotion from the Eastern side. What are you looking at from a Western equivalent? What's the viewpoint there?
Yeah, so I would say in the Western equivalent, so how do we process shame, or how do we handle shame? Let's say, let's divide it into a couple things. One is that there are certain techniques that you can do to literally reduce the activity of your negative emotional circuitry. So you can do things like breathing exercises. We know that each emotion is correlated with a certain pattern of breathing. So we can even do a quick demonstration where I'm just going to breathe at you, and you tell me if you can tell what kind of emotion I'm feeling, right? So
anger?
Absolutely, right? Now, so it's going to seem similar, but
arousal?
Absolutely, right? Both of them are deep breaths.
I like the second.
Right? And I can't help it. I have to add a little bit of facial expression to it.
Yeah.
And so you can just listen to someone's breathing. And then there's also...
Oh yes, guys. Yes, this is so interesting, and I really love it. This is my first time of watching this video, and I promise you, this video is nice. And this is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 tomorrow. What will you do? I want you to subscribe to my video, watch it, subscribe, and follow. Yes, so that when I post another video, you can be able to get the notification. Yes, see you next time, because this is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 tomorrow. See you on part 2, because I have a lot to say. But to the end of this, if I can help to say anything. See you. Bye.